I'd put up all the money. I'd do all the work. What if you don't mind my asking what you do?
I'd make sure it's known the company's in business. I'd see that it had a certain panache. That's what I'm good at. Not the work, not the work. The presentation.
Schindler's Rosebud. And even though Rosebud turned out to be a sled, Schindler's even more mysterious than Rosebud. I've never had a survivor say categorically he planned to save the Jews from the first day. I've had many survivors say he planned to make a lot of money off of all of us and off the Nazi Party from the first day, and then something happened that changed him, but we can't tell you what day it happened on.
In 1992, Steven Spielberg began work on Schindler's List in Krakow, Poland. He bought the rights to the story Schindler Jews from an author in Australia. Spielberg said in an interview, "I think the main reason I wanted to make this film was an act of remembrance." This movie focuses on Oskar Schindler, a man who despised the Nazi Party but welcomed it with arms wide open to keep reign over the plant he owned. He hired Jews to work on in his factory because they accepted less than slaves' pay, and those Jews survived because of his cunning and charm. The movie depicts brutality and sensual scenes resulting in the R rating. The brutality in the film was shown in a casual light, which was a devastating blow to viewers. Critics praised the film for the powerful retelling of the story, the same critics who couldn't fathom the man who directed Jurassic Park could produce Schindler's List the same year. The film brought Oscars and nationwide fame. President Bill Clinton recommended every American watch this. Schindler's List has been an ethical battleground for over 20 years. Here are a few issues.
So in the film, Schindler's List, it was made in 1992. And during that time, there was some polls that were taken, according to the book, that stated that only half of the U.S. teenagers knew about the Holocaust and what was going on in it. And so that's why Steven Spielberg wanted to make the film, is so that teenagers and other kids would know about the Holocaust, because it did happen and it was a big part of our lives. The movie got an R rating, and I'm just going to go through the different points of why it is rated R, starting with the first one, which is sex and nudity. So in the movie, Oskar Schindler, he wasn't very faithful to his wife, and so there's shots where you see him having intercourse with his mistress, as well as Nazis pushing their will onto other women as well. So shots of nipples are there, you see some thrusting and some moaning is heard, as well as during the Holocaust, the shots that were happening at the camps, you see the women having to strip down and to run to see if they are healthy or not. So those things are the sex and nudity part of this film. There's also a lot of violence and gore. One of the main things that you see is a lot of people being shot in the head. For example, there was a husband and a wife where the wife was sick and the husband was trying to plead for his wife, saying, "I need her to get better, we need to take her to a doctor," and the Nazi shot her in the head. The blood is shot onto the husband, and there's other things like that that are going on in this film. So there's lots of blood and gore in this film. There's also profanity, 12 uses of the F word in this film, as well as other swear words that are being used. There is alcohol as well in this film. So that's why it's an R rating. So now that we know that these things are R, I want to pose the question, would you allow a child under 17 years old to see this film? I would argue no, being a mother, first off, as well as my ancestors are from the Holocaust. I would not want any of my children to see, especially Oskar Schindler's behavior. Yes, they do need to understand what happened at the camp, but they do not need to see the other things that were put in by Hollywood. So there are other ways for children to understand what happened at the Holocaust, such as reading the book Night or Man's Search for Meaning. So those are the things that I would say need to happen. Kids do not need to see this film in particular, but they do need to know about the Holocaust.
This case mentions some people think historical events shouldn't be portrayed through different types of entertainment. Events like the Holocaust or Rwanda, because entertainment cannot portray the true horror of those events. Live Science published an article in February 2013 that contained a summary of research that was done with college students. To summarize that research, people are bad at remembering where they got their information. When people try and recall their knowledge on events like Pearl Harbor, they confuse what is fact and what is fiction. More times than not, the inaccuracies people view in movies is what they recall being historic facts. When Steven Spielberg was asked why he made this film, he said, "I think the main reason I wanted to make this film was an act of remembrance for public record. It might be the kind of movie shown one day in high schools. I also wanted to leave this story for my children. I wanted to leave them a legacy of their Jewish culture." Using entertainment programs and making these historical events come to life for generations that never experienced events like World War II or 9/11 can hopefully give them a glimpse of the horror of those events and help them learn from history and not let those events be repeated in their lifetime.
Schindler was a great deal maker. Schindler was a great CEO, but it was only the war that he was able to control a measure of his own destiny. He failed at every business following the war, and he failed at every business preceding the war. It was only this moment belonged to him, and the end result was he rescued 1,200 human beings who gave birth to many thousands of other human beings. There are more Jews and offspring from those survivors because of what Schindler did than there are Jews today in Poland.
In the textbook, the film Schindler's List is described as a 3-hour and 15-minute examination of the conscience of Oskar Schindler, who entered World War II on the side of the Nazis, intending to make a profit. Schindler's List is known today as one of the most crucial films about the Holocaust. Few films at that point had addressed the horror of Nazi rule with such frankness. The protagonist of the film is Oskar Schindler, a man who began his journey during the Holocaust as a businessman, but who later changed his ways by saving as many Jews as possible, all while maintaining his ruse as trustworthy to Nazis. One of the macro issues from the class text asks what makes Oscar's moral development different from other protagonists, such as Gandhi. One of the most crucial moments of the film is to illustrate how Oskar was moved to action because of his sympathy for the Jews, and in many ways, it was his humanity that caused him to do so. The heart of Oscar's development lies with the question of what is moral, or what is the right thing to do. In this class, we have broken down the questions, theories, and methods we use when we are faced with an ethical choice. Oscar's journey in the film is no different. There are 2 routes Oskar was faced with. The first, benefit from Nazi rule and do not challenge authority, essentially ignoring the senseless murder of thousands of Jews, or he could act. Thankfully, for the film's sake and for the sake of history, Oskar chose the latter, saving many. The development of Oskar is in many ways a reflection of how we as people act when faced with opposing moral choices. Oskar is not a protagonist that is traditionally good. He has no higher moral ground for us to aspire to. To quote the textbook, Oskar Schindler was a complex man. He managed to maintain outward friendships with many Nazis whom he despised. He was a sensualist who enjoyed good food, expensive possessions, and carnal knowledge of women who were not his wife. There are many messages to take away from this story. One of the most crucial ones is that ethics do not belong to the Mother Teresas of the world. They belong to everyone. To act with intention to do good is something that can be achieved by all, and that personally gives me hope.